So D is asking, I had to look twice when I saw Iran and Saudi diplomacy in the news. I have so many questions, from proxy conflicts to the role of US and China in the Middle East to consequences for Islam in general. What do you guys make of it? So this is a big deal, a huge deal. So let me just read you the summary. Iran and Saudi Arabia have agreed to resume diplomatic ties after years of hostility that had threatened stability and security in the Middle East. The deal was brokered by China in Beijing this week and represents a major diplomatic victory for Beijing, as well as challenges for the US. One thing that summary doesn't tell you is that actually it's a much bigger challenge for Israel, which I will talk about it if you guys want. Iran and Saudi Arabia agreed to reopen embassies within 2 months. Wow, this is unbelievable. And to reactivate a 2001 security cooperation accord. The deal also comes amid efforts to end the war in Yemen, where Iran and Saudi Arabia back opposing sides. So this is a huge deal. A huge deal. It could have potentially shift everything in the Middle East, right? So I don't even know where to start. Um, so let's start with Iran. Iran is obviously being pressured into, well, it seems like it's being pressured into this deal, both by China and the Iranian people, because of the recent protests in Iran. Iran's diplomatic standing and its soft power in the world has weakened dramatically in the past couple of months, and it's been devastated because of more challenges, both because of its international relationships and more sanctions, and because of the revolution that is happening in Iran right now. Europe also turning on Iran as well, and becoming more, putting a lot more pressure on the Iranian government. So Iran's economy was always challenging ever since the U.S. sanctions, ever since Trump threw out the deal, the JCPOA, but it becomes extremely a lot worse ever since the revolution because of more sanctions and more unity, global unity against the government by international actors, right? So what has led into is the currency of Iran, the value of the Iran's currency crashing, and Iran has lost a lot of soft power, but also a lot of economic power globally, which might have led it to be pressured into accepting this deal, accepting this negotiation. And China is probably has been taking advantage of the revolution in Iran to be able to force Iran into this agreement, because China has two incentives in doing this. First, it wants to show that it's now the big player in the Middle East, and it's going to come and replace the US. As the US is trying to reduce its influence in the Middle East, China is going to show that, like, I'm the big boy here now. And this is a major, major signal, because this is something, bringing countries together and doing deals like this was usually a US thing to do. And now China that is doing it with the two biggest actor in the Middle East, kind of shows how big the hand of China is. But also China will benefit a lot from stability between these two countries, because China wants to do a lot of deals with Saudi Arabia and Iran as well, but bigger deals with Saudi Arabia relative to Iran. And the instability, the threat that Iran is to Saudi Arabia is something that China can't tolerate. And China has a lot of influence on Iran. And the fact that China has a lot of influence on both Iran and Saudi Arabia makes it, it's basically China's become both Iran's and Saudi Arabia's and a lot of other countries' daddies. So if they have to, it used to be Russia, but now it's switching to China. So China is, they kind of have to listen to it like the good little boys they are, right? Because the Middle East is going to be a major supply of China's energy, and China wants to enjoy stability there. So it's pushing these countries together. But the thing is that this is a major shift from the direction that Saudi Arabia was moving ahead, because Saudi Arabia was very, very aggressively moving against Iran's government, and in the same way it was with Khamenei. They seemed to be, the shift was growing, and it didn't seem to be wanted to go in any other direction, and then more hostility. Which is weird because both Khamenei and Mohammed bin Salman have signaled that they consider the other side pure evil. Mohammed bin Salman compared Khamenei to Hitler, and they said, like, there's no way we can get along with these people. Like, this is an enemy that needs to be eliminated. And Khamenei had said similar things about Mohammed bin Salman and Saudis. But now they're shifting directions. Go on. You want to say something?
No, finish your point, because I have two questions on that whole thing.
Right. So this is really bad because for Israel, because Saudi Arabia was moving away from Iran, and the challenge of Iran and the threat that Iran is to Saudi Arabia was pushing all these Gulf Arab countries to have a unity with Israel. But now Israel, which was already, so here's another thing that basically a lot of things have come together to make this happen. The instability in Iran, the revolution that is happening, China's growing influence over the Middle East, but also Israel's internal politics has made the protests there. So basically there's two protests that are happening: protests in Iran and the protests in Israel, right? And the protests in Israel has made Israel a much less stable ally for Saudi Arabia, especially because a whole bunch of racists have come into power in Israel. And it's one thing for Saudi citizens to accept to not challenge their government when it comes to getting closer to Israel. Now it's even more difficult because you have people within the government of Israel that are so explicitly racist. Like, I mean, there were always racists inside the government, but this level of explicitness, it was never out there. Like, these are people who were arrested by Israel itself for being this racist, right? That's how racist they are. So selling that unity is a much harder sell. Unfortunately for Iranian protesters, this opens bad news, because it basically gives a lot of breathing room for the Iranian government. It makes them look like hypocrites, because they were always chanting, singing about how they will crush Saudi Arabia, that they are their number one enemies, that they will invade Medina and Mecca one day, that the heart of Iran will be Mecca one day. So and now they're like completely giving in and becoming making a deal with them, so it makes them look like hypocrites.
So 2 points.
But at the same time, the Iranian currency just made a huge rebound after this news, which shows that the significance of it. Yeah, go on.
So 2 points. First, obviously, one thing that we've seen, that all these authoritarian countries are joining forces against, the free world, as we like to call it. What we've always seen, that authoritarians always hate springing up of democracies in their neighborhood. So if this revolution did become successful, let's just say, wouldn't that be a bad news for Saudi Arabia as well? Because they say that when Arab Spring happened, Putin saw this video of Gaddafi getting assassinated or getting beaten up by a mob. He was terrified of that. A lot of authors have actually spoken about it, people who are experts on Russian politics. And he was worried that it could happen to him as well one day. Xi Jinping doesn't want Putin to lose, because that would be a win for democracy in Ukraine if Putin loses. So authoritarians all around the world, they hate democracies. And obviously, as much as Saudi Arabia and Iran hate each other, they're both authoritarian governments. So don't you think that this could be the reason why they're like, okay, maybe, we can't let democracy flourish? Because one outcome of this Iranian revolution could be that Iran becomes a modern progressive democracy, because the people of Iran have shown their affinity towards democracy. What do you think? Could that be that Obviously there would be more nuances in that as well, but could that be one of the reasons as well? But if that is the reason, then how do you explain that no, actually I want you to answer that one first.
Well, I mean, the main reason is Saudi Arabia doesn't have the time or the patience or the risk capacity to see if this revolution is going to take place or not. And revolutions could take years and sometimes decades, even if they're going to be successful. And we don't, and Saudi Arabia needs economic diversity now. And for it needs investments now. And because it needs investments now, it needs stability now. And Iran being unstable means that they might do more attacks. And you saw what they're capable of with their attacks on Aramco. And nothing stopped them. They just, like, with very cheap drones, they managed to basically make oil not come out of Saudi Arabia for a while, which is devastating, right? Which means investors a lot of nervous, right? So even if you have investors, they're going to buy your shares or invest with a much lower valuations, given the risk that is Iran. So if that risk is not there, there's going to be a lot more demand for Saudi projects now, and that's what they need. Right.
So for Saudi, so you're saying for Saudi Arabia, this is a deal with the devil. It's a necessary evil for them.
It's so necessary for them, and they can't wait for anything.
But then,
also,
yeah, go on. I'll finish your point.
Okay, and so here's the thing, though. There's three options for Iran, and the Saudi government. First of all, let's be clear. We're talking about the Saudi government because for Saudi Arabia, it would be beneficial if Iran turns into a secular democracy, right? Because I'm separating Saudi Arabia from the Saudi government, right? Because if your neighbor is a secular democracy, it will have effects on you. You will have much more normal trade with them, much more stable trades with them. So it's a win-win.
But the Saudi government would never want that. That's what I'm saying. They would never want that.
Yeah, the Saudi it would be horrible for the. Okay, so there's three options for Iran, and I could tell you which one Saudi wants, right? The current government staying in power, right? They don't want that. But they might have to deal with it. It becoming a secular democracy, they don't want that because the Saudi government has been very allergic to democracies anywhere in North Africa or the Middle East, right? The third option that they probably like the most, and it shows their investments and the people who they support shows that that's what they want, is for the revolution to lead into the collapse of not just the government but the society as a whole, and for Iran to get cut into different pieces. So that's where their investments are going. So
the follow-up question to that is, okay, so maybe we don't like these guys. I'm speaking from Saudi's point of view. We don't like these guys, but we need stability. We need investors' confidence, blah, blah, blah. So therefore, if China gets in and they can somehow mediate and make us friends again, then that's okay. Okay. But these two schools of thought are so diametrically opposed to each other. How long do you think that's going to last? I think this is a deal made in hell, because that would never last long. What do you think then? Because you said, when you were reading the article, you said that, this is big and this is like going to have far-reaching consequences. Yes, but I don't have any faith in that. Like, I mean, I think because they hate each other so much, it just cannot last.
Okay, so there's two things that puts them. One increases the chance of this lasting, and one decreases, right? If we know from the Saudi side, they very much like Iran. So here's the thing: Saudi Arabia doesn't have any ambitions outside of its borders, right? Everything it does outside of its borders is mostly based on the Iran threat, right? So the problem, at least, is not coming from the Saudi side when it comes to this relationship. Iran has ambitions outside of its border, so it's Iran that is the aggressor here. Saudi Arabia is the defender here, right? So Iran, being aggressive towards Saudi Arabia, depends on its needs and the stability it feels that it has right now, right? So when it becomes more stable, it might become more of a threat to Saudi Arabia, because it feels like nothing can challenge it. But also when it becomes less stable, it also might become a threat to Saudi Arabia, because it might think like, I need an external enemy right now to direct all the attention to that rather than my internal matters, right? So in both situations, it might find motivations to be an aggressor to Saudi Arabia, right? So that's why we're like, okay, so they seem to be always wanting to be aggressive to Saudi Arabia. That seems bad. And then, yeah, that's exactly what makes this a not stable deal. What could potentially make it more stable is the China element and the money element, okay? So now you have an actor here that is being involved, and both Saudi Arabia and Iran are heavily reliant on China's investment and projects. And if China wants something, they seem to be listening to it. So the Chinese element might make it a lot more stable. You're muted.
Right. Okay. Yeah. Good. Yeah. Look, I think it's interesting. I don't think it's going to last long. I don't think that there could be my bias.
You might be
liberal
right.
democracy bias that the West is going to come out on top in this entire thing. The age of dictatorship, authoritarianism, that is going down. Autocracy, I think, to me, that's going down. I don't think some pundits are predicting that China's economy is going to collapse very soon. I don't know how true is that. I'm not the expert of that, but like this whole construction bubble that's burst in China.
It will suffer, but it will not collapse.
Yeah, but semiconductors.
It will have a major. The main prediction is that it will have a major correction, right? But not to the point of collapse.
But if that happens, though, because we know that when people suffer economically, they somehow they rebel against the government. So CCP, because it's an authoritarian government, that's what I'm saying. Like the consequences could be far-reaching in that case. Whereas in democracy, revolutions are hard to come by, because if you don't like a leader, you can get rid of him in 4 years or 5 years. But Xi Jinping has shown all signs that he wants to be a president for life. And, this is the first time we've seen the kind of protest that we've seen in China. It's the first time, in living memory, we've seen that. So if something bad happens to Chinese economy and people suffer, then I think eventually, again, like this could be my biased wish that, who knows, there might be another revolution in China. Putin is, I don't think Putin can't live for another 20 years. We know something's going to change in Russia. We don't know whether the next guy we're going to get is going to be worse than Putin, or there could be, we could get real democracy in Russia, but we don't know that. But in China, the whole system could go, the whole system, because a system that is built on tyranny and oppression, I don't think they can. I think the age is gone. I used to think that, okay, it would be very interesting how, because the Chinese model might be the new model, might be the way to the future. But now I'm looking at a lot of people who used to say that China will surpass the United States in economy. That might not happen.
No, that's not. I mean, total number or per capita?
No, total number.
Total number is happening. No, total number is going to happen. It's total GDP.
Look, they're saying that. Yeah.
No, total number.
It's harder to maintain.
It has already.
It's already 19 happened. And the other one's 25 trillion, isn't it? Like something like that.
Well, I mean, depends on how you measure the GDP, but by some estimates it already has, and it's going to go below maybe again, but it will catch up again. The point is that GDP is not a really good measure.
Yes.
GDP per capita.
What's the other one? I was watching a video. There's another one. It's called something value, like a total.
GDP per capita. That's the major one.
No. That's for individual. No, there's actually something else. I forgot the term. I was watching this documentary yesterday. Again, I'm not an expert. I'm just saying, like, that they explain this whole thing, and I'll explain you the thing, but I forgot what it's called. So basically, they look at the whole value of the country. GDP was an old metric that was done when economies were more manufacturing based. Now, obviously, the more advanced an economy is, the less manufacturing it is. It is more service based economy, etc. So you look at the total
service. Service GDP covers service as well.
Yeah. But what I'm about to tell you. But then you look into other factors as well. You look at the human capital, which GDP does absolutely nothing. For example, like you look at how many Nobel prizes the United States have won, and in the fields of sciences versus China, and then you look at the actual output in terms of they're kind of like these abstract ideas. For example, patents that you look at, and then they turn into something else. I think from memory, for example, the total technological exports of
send it to me. We could talk about it later, because I think that we're getting into a lot of economic detail.
Okay.
Get my best-selling book, Why There Is No God, for free. Click on the link for it in the description.